What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and I am very excited about making this video for two reasons. The first is that it's been a while since I uploaded on this channel, and I think now it's time to bring this channel back to life. And the second reason is that I have waited a very long time to get my hands on this Mac Studio and then share my experience with it and the performance gains that I have seen as a video producer with a Blackmagic 6K RAW production workflow. Apple announced this Mac Studio in March of 2022, so it's already been about 6 months since it came out. And I've had it here in the studio for the past 2 months, and I have quite a few thoughts about it. But before we get into those, let's just take a moment and appreciate this amazing unboxing experience following a long waiting period. In fact, I was waiting for a product like this ever since Apple announced their M1 Mac Mini. I wanted something that was better than an M1 Mac Mini, but didn't want to go as high as a Mac Pro, and I did not want a laptop. I wanted a desktop. So here I've opened the box sideways. Oops, I was way too excited for this one to even realize it. So in true Apple style, the unboxing experience is very minimalistic. On one side, we have some paperwork along with this black Apple sticker. And here we have this beastly chunk of metal, which is the Mac Studio. Other than that, there's just one thick braided power cable. I must say, in terms of size, this Mac Studio is surprisingly small for the amount of power it packs in. It has this beautiful unibody design, which means that this whole thing has been carved out of a single piece of aluminum, and the only fixture on it is this bottom panel. In terms of looks, it's basically an oversized Mac Mini. It's like 2.5 Mac Minis stacked on top of one another. It's about 3.7 inches tall and 7.7 inches wide, in case you're planning for your own setup. Now, some of you might think that this design looks a bit plain and boring. Call me an Apple fanboy. I think the simplicity kind of accentuates the amount of power that is housed in this beast. It feels unassuming till you put it through its paces and then get blown away by the performance. Now, this Mac Studio that I got is with the M1 Max chip, which starts at around $2,000. And then there's another one with an M1 Ultra chip, and that one starts at $4,000. It has two USB-C ports at the front, and with the M1 Ultra variant, both of these are Thunderbolt 4 ports. Then there's also an SD card reader. Then on the back, we have 4 more Thunderbolt 4 ports, and these are all Thunderbolt ports in all Mac Studio variants. Then we have a 10 gigabit Ethernet port as standard in all these models, 2 USB-A ports, yuck, 1 HDMI port, a Pro audio jack for high impedance headphones and speakers, and a power button. And on the bottom side, there's some Mac Studio branding and some air inlets to take air in and then shoot out from the back. Now, one thing that really blew my mind about this Mac Studio is that whenever I put it under extreme loads, like, 6K RAW processing and rendering and all of that, even under heavy load, this fan spits out really cool air, and this fan is dead silent, definitely silent enough for most people to not even notice the sound, let alone be bothered by it. And the reason for this cool and silent air coming out of the Mac Studio is hidden deep inside the M1 chip. A little background. So last year, Apple announced their Apple Silicon, i.e. the M1 chipset, because these M1 chips were offering two things very successfully: more power and unbelievable efficiency. Check this out. So the base M1 Mac Mini, which costs around $700, when compared with my 8-core Core i9 16-inch MacBook Pro, really gave it a run for its money, and I paid around $2,400 for that computer. With the M1 MacBook Pro in Geekbench, both the single core and the multi-core scores of the M1 chip were better. But because the M1 chip didn't have a powerful enough GPU, in GPU intensive tasks like video rendering, the performance was not as good as the Core i9. But as a first generation entry-level chip competing with one of the most powerful Intel laptop chips at the time at a fraction of the cost, this was game-changing. We were seeing better battery life on M1 laptops, fan noise was much lower and even non-existent, but it didn't stop there. Enter the M1 Pro and M1 Max chips on 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, and the King Kong of M1 processors, the M1 Ultra with the Mac Studio. So the M1 Pro chip has more than double the transistors of the M1. The M1 Max has 70% more transistors than the M1 Pro, and then the M1 Ultra is basically two M1 Max chips put together using Apple's proprietary Ultra Fusion technology. Now, I'm sure many of you might be wondering why I got the M1 Max chip and not the M1 Ultra. Well, for me, I couldn't justify spending twice as much money, where at least for video production, the gains were marginal. Around 15 to 20% is what I was seeing in my research. I'm sure there are workflows where the M1 Ultra is a better option, like 3D modeling and high-grade audio production, but for video production and rendering, I didn't really see that much of a difference. Definitely not enough of a difference to justify paying twice the price. So now let's talk about this M1 Max chip. It's a 5nm processor with 10 CPU cores, 24 GPU cores, 32 gigs of unified memory. Basically, this is RAM, but it works a little differently in Apple's architecture. Then there's a 16-core neural engine, 400 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, dedicated engines for H.264 and ProRes video, and as a useless marketing statistic, this chip can play 18 streams of 8K ProRes all at the same time. If you're into multi-monitor setups, this Mac Studio can take 4 6K screens and a 4K TV all at once. And all these specs combined together, according to Apple, make this M1 Max chip more powerful than the base configuration of Apple's highest pro-grade computer, the Mac Pro. But then again, what does this really mean for my video production workflow? In short, the answer is faster render times and the ability to produce more complex projects smoothly. Now here I'm going to show you an example of my own video production project. I did this video called Mobile Battlegrounds on my other channel some time ago, and that's been one of the most complex videos I've done so far. It was all recorded in 4K ProRes and had LUTs, graphics, and text, and then finally rendered out in 1440p. By the way, now I record everything in Blackmagic 6K RAW. Just saying. So let's look at the render times. With my Core i9 MacBook Pro, it took me 28 minutes to render the final file out, and I'd made some mistakes and it took me another couple of rounds of rejigging to get the video right. That exact same video took 8 minutes and 42 seconds to render on my Mac Studio, which is 1/3 of the time. I mean, that is huge. That means that I can render that same project on this Mac Studio, fix the mistakes, and probably render it out a couple of more times, and my Intel Core i9 MacBook Pro would have only rendered that file once. The time gains are massive. There's a multiplier effect when you have mistakes. You know, the same project could take you an hour, a couple of hours more, and all that time saved is money saved. And not to mention that my Intel machine sounded like a jet taking off under the slightest of loads. So yeah, I'm gonna really enjoy this new Mac Studio. I'm really glad that I made it part of my workflow. And so far, it's holding up fine with my raw production workflow. But let me have your thoughts about the Mac Studio. What did you think? How was your experience? In the comment section below. If you're new on the channel, be sure to subscribe. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.